Hey, hello and welcome. My name is Sherry Bevan, and today I'm doing an interview with Kate Crane, and we're going to be talking about job hunting after redundancy and what she's learned from her experience. So my name is Sherry Bevan and I run The Confident Mother, which is an independent coaching practice, and this interview is in the Career Conversations group. So for more interesting conversations about career conversations, come over to that group on Facebook. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Kate. So Kate, very warm welcome and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
That's okay.
So I guess for everybody listening, it'd be useful to kind of set the scene first and give us the context. So if you could just tell us a bit about your career background, like what you do or what you were doing when you got made redundant, that sort of thing.
Well, I have a whole host of experiences I could talk about redundancy, because I've actually been through redundancy 4 times, although
4 times. Oh wow, okay.
So 2 of them were very much under my control and 2 weren't. So after university I had a very brief time in accountancy, and then I worked in IT support and IT management for about 20 years. One of my redundancies after that, I actually chose to leave IT, and I worked freelance for a couple of years before moving into the charity sector. And I worked for NCT for 7 years, mostly in a role that you could call half IT support anyway, but it was much more volunteer support. And then I was made redundant from there last summer. And in December, I was offered a position as the operations manager for a professional body that supports and represents psychosexual and relationship therapists across the UK.
Wow, so 4 times, that's tough, isn't it, going through redundancy 4 times?
Yeah.
So I was very interested straight away there when you said that 2 times you felt in control and 2 times you didn't feel in control.
Yeah.
So could you perhaps talk a little bit about that and what gave you that control and what didn't?
Okay. So the 2 times where I felt under control, one of the times we knew redundancies were happening, but that it was in a large enough organisation where they could offer alternative roles. So there was another role on offer which I could take, but I actually could choose to volunteer for redundancy. So I actually spent that time looking for another job. So that was one time, and another time was when I left IT. I didn't feel that the role that I was in was going anywhere, and I could kind of see the writing on the wall. And I was at a time with my children where they were coming up to school age, and the work that I was doing wasn't really compatible with family life. So I decided to ask if they would make me redundant, and they agreed. So in those 2 times, I was very much in control of my own destiny, and I felt it was my choice. But the other 2 definitely weren't, and neither of them were particularly expected.
Right, so they kind of came out of the blue for you then.
Absolutely.
And do you think that made it more challenging to deal with because you weren't expecting them?
Yeah, I mean, one of them, I was working for a company and my boss changed, and this boss actually, after about 6 months, took me and the head of another department into a room and said, I'm going to make one of you redundant. I'm going to interview both for the role now.
Oh, wow.
And it was at a point where actually it would never happen now. The HR people didn't even know about it and things like that. And I actually offered voluntary redundancy, and by the end of the day we had agreed that. So I actually left next day. So it was all very quick. So I did feel totally like it was out of control. And it was quite close to Christmas as well, which is kind of about the worst time you can imagine to be made redundant. So yeah, that one, although there were signs that the boss was doing some strange things, because he was doing things behind people's backs and stuff like that, it was still a shock to be in a role one day and the next day you're leaving. It's, you know, it's very sudden, and you're just like, what am I going to do?
Gosh, yes, that is very sudden. And was that because the organisation was going through financial difficulties, or was he
Not at all. It was just his decision. I mean, after I went and told HR what was going on, they walked in his office and said, "Can you tell us what's going on?" Because they had no idea. It was a really strange situation, and it would never happen again today. And I kind of just made the decision easier by saying, well, I don't really want to stop in the joint role. I'm going to take redundancy. So I guess there was a little bit of control on my side, but I wasn't planning that happening right just at that point. I
Yeah.
was very happy in the role, and had that not happened, I could have been there for many years to come because I was really enjoying it.
Wow, that's I mean, we hear stories of things like this happening, and you always think, well, well, it seems like so unbelievable, doesn't it, that somebody in today could still behave like that and get away with it. But these things do. We know these things happen.
It was the late 90s, so it was very. Guess it was a different time, and I think the guy felt like he needed to make his mark. So it didn't help me at the time, but yeah, I can look back now and think perhaps it was the right thing for me. But I didn't particularly like him as a boss, so in that respect, it was a relief. But the rest of it was just so sudden.
Yes. Gosh, yes. And even when you're in control of being made redundant, I think when it's very sudden like that, you need a little bit of time to process how you feel about it, even if it's a positive thing for you. But you still need a little bit of time to kind of go through things and process and kind of come to some sort of acceptance of it.
Absolutely, yes.
So with the times when you've been made redundant, then tell me about how the job hunting side of things afterwards worked. Did you find it more challenging because you've been made redundant, or tell me about that side of things?
I wouldn't say necessarily more difficult. I think this last time was harder because I had moved sectors. I've always felt that in IT, it was, if you'd got good skills, you could normally pick up a role quite quickly. Yeah. And quite easy to build up contacts. And because of my position, I was doing recruitment, so I knew the recruitment consultants quite well. So when I turned around to them and said I was made redundant, they were like, "Yeah, we'll find you another job, don't worry." And I had another job within 6 weeks.
Oh wow, that's quick.
Yeah. So that over Christmas as well. So by the end of January, I was working again.
Wow.
But this time around, because I was in the charity sector, charity recruitment is very, very different to IT recruitment. I'm sure you know that as well. And there's a lot more to put into it. It made me think about what I really wanted to do, and whether I wanted to work full-time and part-time. I'm still part-time in this role, and I wanted to stay part-time and have a flexible role because I've still got children. They're a bit older now, they're teenagers, but I wanted that. But because I needed to earn some money, there was kind of trying to look more broadly at what was available to me in the local area, maybe full-time. Tried to keep within charities, but I also kind of widened my outlook to more educational establishments as well, like universities.
But still that non-profit sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Stick in the non-profit sector, but mine rather just sticking at the charity sector, looking at what was there. A couple of trade federations and things like that I looked at. So it did make me think about what I wanted to do. Obviously, for me, working in the charity sector, using the right websites, like Charity Job for charities, because I found if I went on Indeed, I'd get depressed.
Yes.
The kind of role, every other role was a commission only role or something like that, very, very specific, or very, very specific, or not particularly challenging. So looking in the right place really helped me. But it was quite wearing applying for jobs, because you've got to put in a really good application in order to get yourself to be seen, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you put in quite a lot of applications last year when you got made redundant. So what sort of tips have you got to share with other people? How can you make your job application get you noticed and get onto the top of the interview pile?
Okay, for me, I think making sure that you've got some feedback on your CV. It's very easy just to throw together a CV when you get made redundant and assume that it's going to be okay. And having done it from the other side, having done recruitment, I'm pretty sure that a lot of people have thrown together a CV and not actually considered how it actually looks and comes across. So getting feedback from others is really useful. In the charity sector, they either want you to do a full personal statement or a covering letter, which has to be detailed. You can't just copy and paste something you wrote for 10 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon and use it for every application. You've got to show that you really want the job and show why you really want the job and how you meet their criteria. They'll all have these person specs with essentials and desirables. And particularly at the moment, if you can't meet all the essentials, unless it's a massive long list, you shouldn't probably really apply, because you know, there's a number of people that they're going to get. They're going to knock you out if you've got one thing on there that's quite important to them. And obviously further up the list, if it's something at the top of their list and you can't meet that criteria, I wouldn't start. And there was a couple of jobs that I went to start applying for, and actually I got part of the way through and I couldn't get excited about applying for the job. So I thought perhaps this is perhaps one I'll just chalk this off to an hour's waste of time. But I did treat job hunting pretty much like working. So I did try to work. I mean, obviously when the children were out at school, or even when they were off school, getting up in the morning and turning my computer on, checking what vacancies were out there, which ones were closing soon. Had I done the application? What did I need to do? Did I need to fill out a form, or can I just send my CV and write a letter? You know, all those kind of things, and try and plan them in so that I didn't miss anything. And, you know, just make sure I've got a target for the end of the day to apply for those particular jobs, you know, the high priority ones. And then if there were some lower priority ones that perhaps I thought I might do and could still kind of feel quite excited about applying for, then I would kind of go on with those. But it is a hard slog, particularly when you don't hear anything at all after you've hit that send button, and you wait for the closing date and nothing happens, and then you never hear from them ever again.
It's very disheartening, isn't it? I just wish in some ways we could do something to make the overall recruitment process easier from the candidate perspective, because it's so, you know, it's horrible when you just don't hear back from the individuals. It's very, very hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't know why you've been rejected, especially when you think you've put together a really good application that addresses everything that they're looking for, and then they come back and say, well, sorry, no. You're like, well, why not? You know, there were a few. I was convinced there were some that I would, you know, be able to meet the criteria and get on the shortlist, and I either got a no or heard nothing from them ever again. And it just is really frustrating, because you want that feedback from people.
Yeah, absolutely. You want that feedback, and you don't know in those situations where perhaps they already had a candidate in mind, either external or internal. Yeah. And I remember a tip talking to somebody else about the essential criteria. She was saying about when you're doing that cover letter, to make sure that you go through the essential criteria in the order that they're written on the sheet. Because it's all about making it easy for the person who's reviewing all the CVs. Whereas if they have to keep going backwards and forwards, tick, tick, then you're more likely to get yourself onto the yes list. Yeah,
it's surprising how many people don't realise that sometimes. So it is a lot of effort, but it's worth it if you do really want that job. And you've also got to try and keep in a positive frame of mind when you're writing those things, because there were some days where I just think, do you know what, today I am having the day off because I just really don't feel like applying for jobs today. You know, particularly when the children are on school holidays, you want to go and do other things, and it did become almost like my full-time job for 6 months this time around. It was, you know, so you need to keep positive. So if you don't feel positive, okay, yeah, there's a fake it till you make it argument, but sometimes it's best to take a break from it, walk away, come back when you're feeling a bit better and you've slightly refreshed.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think sometimes your energy does come across when you're writing those application letters, and if you're and it's subtle stuff. I mean, you probably couldn't pick up the cover letter and think, oh, that person wasn't in a good mood when they wrote it, but it's just somehow the wording and the phrasing that you might use. absolutely agree that. So you were out of work for 6 months. How did you stay positive in that time? How did you keep going?
Just tried to keep learning from my failures, I think. If I could get feedback, but there were some interviews I knew that I walked out and I knew I wasn't going to get, and I wasn't so fussed about those for whatever reason. But from the ones that I didn't get that I really wanted, I made sure I've got feedback from people that I felt that I had a good rapport with, or anything like that. So just ideas. There was always a lot of charities do competency-based interviews, which I don't particularly like, but there was certain types of questions that I was struggling with. So I actually asked a couple of my colleagues about things, and can you think of a situation that we've had in the last few years that would fit this kind of question that I'm struggling with? So I've had some ideas, and that really helped. And just try to keep doing, just keep doing it, because eventually I knew it would stick. I found that I was pretty good at doing interview tasks if they wanted to prepare a presentation, to the point that back in last September I got a phone call about 4:10 on a Tuesday, and they asked me to attend an interview at 12 o'clock on Wednesday in the middle of Manchester, and oh, by the way, could I do a 10-minute presentation? And they said they would allow for the fact that I'd had less time to prepare, so I presume someone else had dropped out, and actually I nearly got the job. I only missed out. So they were saying, for whatever reason, they discounted my application, maybe because I was slightly less experienced in some of the areas that they were looking at, but the fact that I was able to pull off a good presentation and do well in the interview task, which I did on arrival, it held me in good stead. So I knew that I learned quite a lot about myself as well. I knew the things that I could do. If I needed to put together a presentation quickly, I can do one and make it sound logical.
Yeah, I really like your idea of asking colleagues about situations. I think it's that same thing as you can't always see you can't see what's on the end of your nose sometimes, and so you don't always recognize your own talents and skills, or things that come so naturally to you that it doesn't occur to you that that's a skill or a talent. But I'd imagine as well, in certain situations, you don't recognize that perhaps this is a situation that reflected how you deal with difficult customers, for example, or this is a situation where you're able to demonstrate, I don't know, integrity or something. So I think asking colleagues for ideas on that is a really good idea.
Yeah, and I just found it helped me feel confident at the interview if I knew that I'd got some scenarios ready, so I didn't feel stumped. And having sat on the other side, because I recruit as a school governor, I have seen people go to pieces on one question and then never recover from it for the rest of the interview. They've been fine until that one throws them out, and then they just can't answer. You could ask them their name and they would probably fail on that one, because they're just focusing on the fact that they did so badly at that one question, which they should have just ignored and carried on. So let's start afresh with the next one. And I think you get better at that as well. You start thinking, right, I'm just not worried about that one, just get on with the next one. But I found if I had some ideas in my head ready, then I didn't feel quite so stumped when those questions were asked. Felt slightly more confident, because they would always ask them, everyone would ask them in a slightly different way, but you could kind of spot what you could use in those situations, and therefore I think coming across more confident makes you seem more competent as well. Makes sense.
Yeah, brilliant. Any final tips, Kate, for people listening?
Well, I would say don't give up. I realise at the moment that is probably it's a really obvious thing to say, and it's always like, oh, it's easy for you to say. I get that it was really hard for me, and I get that it's probably this year even harder. But if you keep working at it and keep letting your positive attributes shine through in your application and in your interview, you're going to be a strong candidate, and all you can do is control how you apply and how you perform an interview. You can't control the rest. So if 10 other people who happen to be better than you apply, then there's not a lot that you can do about that, and that's really frustrating. But you just have to try and keep going, and keep trying, and you will eventually get there. It will maybe take some time, and it will probably take longer than you want it to, but if you do keep trying, eventually you will get there.
Yeah, and I think it's a really positive thing that I always say to my clients to bear in mind is that if you've got the interview, that means your CV is good and strong, and because you're not going to get an interview unless your CV is doing its job. So don't be discouraged if you got the interview, didn't get the job, then it's still a very positive thing.
I think you did say that to me at one stage as well.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'm sure I did at one point. Any other final thoughts, Kate?
No, but if there's anybody made redundant at the moment, I just wish them the best of luck, because I totally understand that it's a difficult position to be in. It's not one you were mostly planning to be in, and yeah, all I can say is you will get there, but it just might take longer than you want it to.
Yeah, that is the thing at the moment, isn't it? And I think something that's come up in the other interviews I've done is that right now it's become less, there's definitely less of a stigma nowadays to being made redundant. I think that's come about over since the financial markets crashed in 2007 2008. I think it's 2008 2009 rather. There's less of a stigma attached to it now. It's become more of a norm to get made redundant, and people are, so I think there's less shame around it, which perhaps there might have been 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And I think I was, to an extent, I think it's probably more true this year than it was last year, because I did start to feel last year that maybe me being redundant and unemployed up against people that were actually already in jobs may have been a factor as well in, maybe not quite making that final. People thinking, well, she's been out of work for three months, maybe there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
But at the moment, you can't really say that. So that is an advantage in a weird kind of way.
Yes.
It's leveled the playing field a bit. More people like to be looking for jobs.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Yeah, it's because even though an interviewer might not consciously be thinking, "Oh, she's been out of work for 3 months," I think it's one of those subconscious thoughts that they might not even be, that unconscious bias, isn't it? That you might not. Whereas at the moment, there are so many people who are facing redundancy or who are actively job hunting or are expecting to, to need to look for new work. Great, Kate, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you giving up your time this evening. Yeah, and to anybody out there who is currently job hunting or who has been made redundant or facing redundancy, then come and join the Career Conversations group, because we've got lots more interesting interviews lined up over the next few weeks. So thank you very much, Kate.
Thanks, Sherry.